I always thought I had my life figured out. People in my neighborhood used to call me wise, dependable, and steady. I was the woman who could cook a meal out of scraps, the woman who knew how to soothe a crying child, the woman who had lived long enough to give advice that carried weight. To my family, I was the backbone. To the children around me, I was Grandma, even though some of them were not mine by blood. My mornings followed a rhythm. I woke before the sun, boiled water for tea, and sat by the window to watch the light crawl across the street. Children's voices always carried through the thin walls of our block. They came running, shoes untied, hair messy, calling out, "Grandma, Grandma, are you making breakfast today?" They didn't live under my roof, but they might as well have. I brushed their hair, stitched their clothes, and packed their lunches as if my hands had been made for that purpose alone. Neighbors admired me for it. At church, people would smile and say, "You're blessed to be surrounded by so many little ones." I nodded and smiled back, proud of the way they clung to me. Some even whispered that I was more mother than their real mothers. I never corrected them, because it felt true. My house was their safe place. My lap was their pillow. My arms were their shield. My husband often joked, "You've built yourself a second family." I laughed then, not knowing how sharp that truth really was. I believed in duty. I believed in loyalty. And above all, I believed in love, the kind that never runs dry. That's why when children looked at me with tired eyes or empty stomachs, I never asked whether it was my responsibility. I simply acted. I bought shoes when their soles had worn out. I sewed costumes for their school plays. I spent late nights nursing fevers, whispering prayers over their beds. I thought that made me strong. I thought it made me needed. But looking back, I realize it made me blind. There were small moments that should have made me pause. The way one little girl had her father's smile but never mentioned his name. The way my husband sometimes vanished with the excuse of helping a neighbor. The way my best friend's laughter always rang louder when he was near. I noticed these things, but I buried them under chores and recipes. I told myself, "You're imagining shadows." To the children, I was second mom. To my friend, I was a convenient helper. To my husband, I was the cover that kept his secret safe. But at that time, none of it was clear. At that time, I believed I was doing God's work by keeping families together, even if it meant wearing myself thin. I believed my loyalty was my crown. I had no idea it was being used against me. The days flowed one into another, like beads on a string. Morning tea, children's footsteps, laughter in the yard, dinner at the long table, bedtime stories whispered under dim lamps. Ordinary life, happy life. At least that's what I thought. What I didn't know, what I couldn't even imagine, was that for 15 years I was not just the caring neighbor, not just the godmother, not even just the trusted friend. I was raising my husband's other family. That truth was waiting for me, quiet as a snake in the grass. And when it finally struck, it tore through everything I believed about love, loyalty, and family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the storm came, there was warmth. Before the betrayal, there was pride. And before justice returned with sweet revenge, there was a grandmother who thought she knew everything. At first, the changes were so small I brushed them aside. A misplaced receipt, a child's innocent slip of the tongue, a knock at the door when my husband wasn't home, followed by a neighbor saying, "Oh, I must have gotten the wrong time. Little things. Ordinary things. Things I convinced myself didn't matter. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found a crumpled shopping receipt tucked in the pocket of my husband's trousers. It wasn't unusual for him to forget things in his pockets, but the receipt was from a store across town, the same store my best friend often shopped at. The item listed wasn't his style either. A girl's pink dress, size 5. I smoothed the paper, told myself maybe he was helping a neighbor. Maybe he was being kind, after all. Wasn't he known for generosity? But then came another slip. I was sitting at the table with little Michael, spooning soup into his bowl, when he looked up at me with a mouth half full and asked, "Grandma, when is Daddy coming back?" I smiled and said, "Which Daddy, my love?" He looked at me puzzled, as if I should already know, and replied softly, "Daddy Robert." My husband's name. My heart skipped, but I forced a smile. Children mix things up, I told myself. They see men as father figures when they spend time around them. I had no reason to doubt the boy. Still, the words hung in the air, sticky and sharp. More small signs followed. My husband's work hours became bendable. He left early, returned late. Sometimes he came home smelling faintly of baby powder or carrying a story that didn't match the day of the week. I noticed, but I swallowed the doubts. I told myself, he's tired. Don't be suspicious. Don't be foolish. Yet the coincidences began to pile up. There was the time we were invited to a neighborhood gathering. My best friend Jennifer stood close by, her children tugging at her skirt. When my husband walked in, her youngest squealed and ran forward, arms wide. I thought he was coming to me, but no. The boy wrapped himself around my husband's leg, calling out, "Daddy!" The room froze for a moment, laughter covering the awkwardness. My husband chuckled nervously and patted the child's head. "Oh, kids say the funniest things," he muttered. People nodded politely, but my ears rang with the word. Then came the letters. A little note, folded in half, that fell out of my husband's wallet when he tossed it onto the dresser. I bent to pick it up. It wasn't a bill, not a list, not anything practical. Just a single line, written in a hand I knew too well. "I love you. Thank you for yesterday." Jennifer's handwriting. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. My first thought was to crumple it, throw it away, pretend I'd never seen it. My second thought was to storm into the living room and demand answers. Instead, I folded it neatly and slid it back where it came from. Fear, pride, and love knotted together in my throat. I told myself maybe it was innocent. Maybe it meant something else. Maybe. But deep down I knew the truth was crawling closer, scratching at the walls of my denial. Nights grew restless. I lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing, wondering whose face he pictured when he closed his eyes. I replayed Michael's slip, the receipt, the boy's hug, the note. Piece by piece the puzzle was forming, but I kept pushing it away. Because what happens when you put the pieces together? What happens when the picture is too ugly to bear? I clung to the hope that I was wrong. That all these fragments were meaningless. That my loyalty, my years of devotion, couldn't possibly have been repaid with betrayal. But as the days went on, the coincidences became too sharp to ignore. And so the question whispered at me in every quiet moment. Could I prove it without tearing everything apart? I used to think receipts were nothing more than scraps of paper, meant to be stuffed in drawers or tossed into the trash. But soon, they became my clues, my quiet witnesses, One evening, while emptying my husband's jacket, another slip of paper fluttered to the floor. It wasn't just for groceries this time. It showed a purchase for school supplies, colored pencils, notebooks, and a child's backpack. We didn't have children in school anymore. The receipt was dated on a day he claimed he had been working late. I folded it carefully, placed it in a small box I kept tucked under the bed, and told myself I was just being cautious. Still, I couldn't deny the sting. Then came a handwritten shopping list, left behind on the kitchen counter. At first glance, it seemed harmless: bread, milk, baby wipes. But in the corner, in neat letters, was a note. "Robert, don't forget Michael's shoes." My hand shook as I recognized the handwriting. Jennifer's. The whispers in the neighborhood added to the unease. Mrs. Davis, who never missed a chance to gossip, leaned toward me one morning and said, "I see Robert around Jennifer's place quite often. You two must be close." I forced a laugh, waved it off. Inside, I was crumbling. I began to notice more. A wallet photo tucked behind his driver's license. Not of me, not of our family, but of Jennifer's children. He explained it away as, "They're like nieces and nephews to me." But why carry it hidden, like a secret pressed flat behind the plastic? Piece by piece, my quiet box under the bed grew heavier. Receipts, notes, scraps of paper with her handwriting. I started writing dates in a small notebook, recording where he said he was, and where I knew he had been. At first I felt guilty, like I was betraying him by doubting. But each entry made the guilt fade and the dread sharpen. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the children. Little Sophia would curl up in my lap and whisper secrets only a child could imagine. "Grandma, you're the best. I wish you were my mommy." Her words filled me with pride, but also confusion. Why wish for me when she already had a mother? Unless deep down, she felt the tug of divided loyalty she couldn't explain. Michael, sweet boy, would reach for my hand on the walk to church, calling me second mom. His love was pure, untainted. And Daniel, still toddling, stretched his arms toward me before anyone else. Their trust was a balm to my heart. And yet, the more I loved them, the deeper the knife twisted, because each scrap of evidence whispered that these weren't just children I cared for. They were my husband's children. I found myself staring at them, memorizing their faces, searching for his features in their smiles. The curve of a cheekbone, the shape of an eye, the familiar arch of a brow. Was I imagining it, or had the truth been written on their faces all along? The betrayal didn't just sit between me and him, it seeped into my bond with them. Loving them made me ache. Every hug, every kiss goodnight, carried the weight of a secret I wasn't supposed to know. Still, I stayed silent. I played the role of the doting godmother, the loyal friend, the steady wife. But behind closed doors, I stacked the proof higher, building a private dossier no one else could see. Every receipt I tucked away. Every note I copied into my notebook. Every whispered comment, every slip of the tongue. I recorded it all, because someday soon, I would need more than suspicion. I would need the truth solid in my hands, and when that day came, there would be no denying it. Once the receipts started piling up, I knew watching wasn't enough. I had to test him, quietly, patiently, without letting him suspect. I began with his comings and goings. Robert always said he worked late on Thursdays. So I marked the clock. I noted when he left, when he returned, and how long it should have taken him to cross town. The numbers never matched. An hour here, 40 minutes there, sometimes more. When I asked, he said traffic was bad or a meeting ran over. But I knew better. Traffic didn't smell like baby powder. Meetings didn't leave lipstick faint on a shirt collar. I started checking the details. His clothes became my evidence. A shirt folded inside out had the faintest trace of perfume. Not mine. A pocket carried a crayon, blue wax pressed against the fabric, the kind a child might use in school. And once, in the lining of his jacket, I found a strand of hair. Not mine, not the right color. My stomach dropped as I held it in the light. I grew bolder. When he said he was heading to the hardware store, I waited 10 minutes and followed in my old car. I kept my distance, hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. But he didn't turn toward the store. He turned toward Jennifer Street. I parked far enough away not to be seen, but close enough to watch him walk up her steps like a man coming home. That night, when he came through our door, I asked him how busy the hardware store had been. He smiled, said, "Empty. Everyone's waiting for payday." I nodded, biting my tongue. The lie slid so easily from his lips that it frightened me. How many times had he done this before? The children, without knowing, confirmed my fears. One evening, little Sophia asked me, "Grandma, will Daddy be back tomorrow?" She meant Robert. Her eyes sparkled with certainty, the kind children carry when they believe in something. My heart twisted. The truth had escaped through their innocent mouths, yet I smiled, kissed her cheek, and tucked her in. I kept recording everything in my notebook. Dates, times, smells, words. I was no longer a wife ignoring shadows. I was an investigator building a case. Each entry made the betrayal more undeniable. And yet, the cruelest part was that my love for the children deepened with every passing day. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the very children I was raising as my own blood were his flesh and bone. They belonged to him, and he had stolen my love to cover his double life. At night, I lay awake, the ceiling pressing down on me. My mind circled the same tormenting questions. Should I confront him outright and risk a storm that could hurt the children, or should I confront Jennifer, the woman I had trusted with every secret, every laugh, every tear? Both paths would lead to pain. Both would tear apart the world I had built with my own hands. But I couldn't stay silent forever. Silence had already robbed me of too much, so I sharpened my resolve. I had the receipts. I had the proof. What I needed now was courage. And the question that echoed louder than all the rest was this: would I confront him, or the one I called my best friend? I chose the morning carefully. The children would still be asleep, and Robert would be at work. If there was ever a time for truth, it was then. When Jennifer opened the door, her face paled. She must have seen something different in my eyes, something colder than the smile I used to wear. Still, she stepped aside, letting me in without a word. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cinnamon toast. We had shared hundreds of mornings in that same room, planning birthday parties, trading recipes, laughing until our stomachs hurt. But that day the air was heavy. The chairs looked harder, the table colder. It wasn't a friend's kitchen anymore. It was enemy ground. I sat down and folded my hands. My voice didn't shake. "I know everything," I said. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears instantly, not of shock, but of recognition. She knew the performance was over. "I know Robert is the father of your children," I continued, my tone steady as steel. "I know you've been with him since before he married me. For 15 years I've loved and raised the children you two created while you smiled in my face." Her shoulders slumped. "Patricia," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't know how many times I wanted to tell you. How many times I almost doesn't count," I cut in, my calmness sharper than any scream. "For 15 years you lied to me. For 15 years you let me spend my money, my time, my love, as if I were the fool who didn't deserve the truth. You didn't just betray me. You stole my life." She wept openly then, hands trembling against her coffee cup. "Robert told me he loved you. He told me he loved both of us. I didn't know how to stop it once it started, and when Sophia was born it was too late. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream, but all I felt was a hollow calm. Too late for you, maybe, but never too late to tell me. And yet you chose silence. Every single day. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. My heart beat in time with it, slow and heavy, like a drum inside my chest. And then, little footsteps. Michael, still in his pajamas, wandered in with sleepy eyes. He looked at me and smiled. "Good morning, godmother. Are you making me breakfast?" I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Of course, sweetheart," I said softly, rising to ruffle his hair. My hands shook as I poured him a bowl of cereal, the most ordinary act in the most devastating moment. Daniel soon toddled in, clutching his blanket, reaching for me as he always did. I picked him up, rocked him gently, my voice low so he wouldn't sense the storm brewing just feet away. Jennifer wiped her tears and whispered, "See? They love you. They always have." Her words stung worse than any blade. They weren't just children I loved. They were proof of the betrayal I had lived blind to. I looked at her over Daniel's tiny head and said, "I won't scream. I won't fight you here. But don't mistake my calm for forgiveness. I can't live this lie any longer. These children deserve to know the truth about their family, and I deserve my life back." She whispered apologies, over and over, but apologies don't stitch back a soul once it's torn. When I left that kitchen, I knew I had crossed a line. I wasn't the silent fool anymore. I wasn't the godmother who accepted scraps of truth. I was the woman preparing for the end of the performance. But the real showdown had to be public. Once the truth sat fully in my hands, silence was no longer an option. But I also knew I couldn't explode in rage. Screaming would only make me look weak, unstable, even pitiful. No. If I was going to end 15 years of lies, it had to be on my terms. Calm, clear, public. So I began to plan. At night, while Robert slept, I sat at the small desk in our bedroom with a notebook. I wrote down everything I had collected, the receipts, the notes, the times he disappeared, the whispers from neighbors. I documented it all in neat, steady handwriting, not for him, not even for Jennifer, for me, so I could look at the proof and never doubt my own eyes again. I placed the receipts into envelopes, sorted by year. I clipped Jennifer's notes together. I even copied my own diary entries, making a small record of how long the performance had lasted. It wasn't a scrapbook. It was an arsenal. But I didn't want to just keep the evidence. I wanted my words to be as precise as the paper. I rehearsed what I would say, short, sharp sentences that would cut deeper than any shout. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman I had once believed was naive, and I practiced saying the words that would break the lie wide open. I chose the day carefully. A birthday party, one of the children's, the perfect stage. Everyone important would be there. The neighbors, family, even the women we worked for. No one would be able to pretend it hadn't happened. No one would be able to dismiss me as bitter or mistaken. They would all hear the truth together. I told my sister Linda a week before. We sat at her kitchen table, and I laid out the evidence in front of her. Her hands shook as she read the notes, flipped through the receipts. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were wet. "How have you carried this alone for so long?" She whispered. "I don't know," I said. "But I can't carry it silently anymore." She gripped my hand. "Whatever happens, I'll be there." Her promise steadied me more than she realized. For 15 years, I had felt alone in my suspicion, in my quiet pain. Now, for the first time, someone else knew the truth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things, and soon everyone else would know too. The night before the party, I prepared my things like a soldier before a battle. I laid out my most dignified navy blue dress, the one I had worn to weddings, church events, and holidays. It wasn't about beauty. It was about standing tall, looking strong, showing them the face of a woman who could not be broken. I packed a small envelope with divorce papers I had already signed. My hand had trembled when I wrote my name across the bottom line, but the signature was bold, final. That envelope would be my last word. I barely slept that night. My body trembled with a strange mixture of dread and relief. I knew the performance was about to end, but endings never come easy. As dawn broke, I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back wasn't the same one who had folded children's clothes in blind devotion. She wasn't the fool who ignored receipts or explained away lipstick stains. She was someone new, and as I breathed in, I whispered to myself, "This isn't revenge. This is dignity," because when I stepped onto that stage, I wasn't just exposing them. I was reclaiming myself. The stakes couldn't be higher. This reveal wasn't just about breaking lies. It was the pivot point of my life. The yard was strung with balloons in yellow and blue, the boys' favorite colors. Tables were lined with food, the smell of roasted chicken and frosted cake in the air. Laughter floated above the chatter of neighbors. On the surface, it was just another family celebration, but for me, every detail felt sharpened, every sound louder, every smile like a mask. I was counting the minutes. I greeted guests as I always did. I played with the children, carried plates, even snapped a few pictures. No one would have guessed what I was holding inside. I was calm, too calm. It was the stillness that comes before thunder. When the food was cleared and everyone waited for the cake, I asked my sister to help gather the guests. They sat in rows of folding chairs, smiling, expecting the usual sweet words. My husband stood by the cake, Jennifer beside him, both unaware of what was about to come. I took a step forward. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "I want to thank all of you for being here today to celebrate Michael's birthday," I began, smiling as if nothing was unusual. For the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of being godmother to him, to Sophia, and to Daniel. They've brought so much joy into my life. The crowd nodded, murmurs of agreement rising. It sounded like the opening of a typical toast. "But today," I continued, my voice cutting through the air like glass, "I want to make a different kind of announcement." The smiles faded, heads tilted, curious. "I want to publicly congratulate Robert and Jennifer. After 15 years of keeping their relationship a secret, today we can finally acknowledge them as a family. Because Robert is the father of these children." The silence was deafening. Faces froze mid-smile. I watched as the color drained from Robert's cheeks. Jennifer clutched the table, trembling. "Yes," I pressed on before anyone could interrupt. "For 15 years, I raised my husband's children, believing I was their godmother. For 15 years, I loved them as my own, while Robert and Jennifer laughed at my loyalty." Gasps rippled through the yard. Neighbors leaned forward, wide-eyed. Some women covered their mouths. Others whispered fiercely to each other. Michael shifted nervously in his chair, not fully understanding but sensing the storm. He ran to me, clinging to my leg. I lifted him into my arms, kissing his hair. My voice softened for a moment. "These children have been the greatest blessing of my life. I will always love them." Then I turned back, my eyes locking on Robert. "But my role in this performance is finished." He stumbled forward, hands raised. "Please don't do this here. We can talk privately. Don't drag the children into this." I met his plea with a calm so cold it startled even me. "You worried about hurting the children now? That concern is 15 years too late. You weren't worried when you built your home on my broken heart." I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. "Here," I said clearly, so every guest could hear. "These are divorce papers, already signed. The only thing left is your name." Robert's hands shook as he took the envelope. He didn't open it. He only stared at me, stunned by the woman who no longer bowed to him. Turning to the crowd, I lifted my chin. "I deserve a life without lies. And I will have it." The party unraveled in stunned silence. Some guests slipped away, others whispered. My sister stood firm at my side, steady as an anchor. I walked out of that yard knowing the lie had shattered for good. But as the cool air hit my face, one thought cut through the relief. Walking away didn't mean walking free. That night, I didn't return to my house. I carried only a small bag and followed my sister Linda home. Her kitchen light glowed like a lighthouse when everything else in my world felt dark. I sat at her table, still in the navy blue dress, still trembling from what I had done. Linda poured tea, slid it across to me, and simply said, "It's over." But endings are never that clean. The days that followed were filled with silence heavy enough to crush me. The phone rang, but I let it ring. The curtain stayed closed, though the sun streamed outside. At Linda's, I listened to the ticking clock and wondered who I was now that the lie had been torn away. The community reacted in its own divided ways. Some neighbors knocked on Linda's door with casseroles and gentle words. Mrs. Herrera whispered, "We wondered for years, but we didn't want to interfere." Others avoided me altogether, slipping down side streets when they saw me coming. Pity hung in their eyes. Some gave me sympathetic smiles, as if I were a widow instead of a wife who had chosen to walk away. One woman at church pressed my hand and said, "You're brave." Another shook her head and muttered, "I would have kept the peace for the children." Their judgment slid off me like rain, but each left a trace of chill. Robert came by 3 times in the first week. The first time he knocked until Linda opened the door and told him to leave. The second time, he waited outside for hours, hoping to catch me on my way out. I didn't give him the chance. The third time, I decided to face him. He stood on Linda's porch, suit rumpled, face drawn. "Patricia," he said, his voice thick, "we don't have to end this way. I can leave Jennifer. We can start fresh somewhere else. Please." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not a man begging for love, but a man desperate to protect his comfort. "You had 15 years to make a choice," I told him. "And you made it every single day. I've made mine now. It's too late." His shoulders slumped, his hands falling helplessly to his sides. For a moment he looked small, almost childlike. But my heart no longer bent toward pity. I closed the door. Jennifer came too. She arrived pale and thinner than I remembered, her eyes swollen from tears. She asked for 5 minutes. Linda hovered close by as I agreed. Jennifer's voice cracked as she spoke. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could manage it. Thought you were happy with the children. I depended on you. You were my friend, Patricia." I listened quietly, my arms crossed against my chest. "Friendship doesn't mean turning someone into a fool," I said. "Friendship doesn't mean stealing 15 years. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I believed her regret was real. But regret doesn't erase a lie. Regret doesn't give back lost years. When she left, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel relief, just distance, an invisible wall that would never fall again. That night, lying on the spare bed in Linda's house, I breathed easier than I had in years. Not because the pain had passed. It hadn't, but because I had chosen myself. I had chosen to step out of the performance, to stop carrying the weight of someone else's sin. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized something important. The silence wasn't punishment. It was space. Space for me to decide what came next. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and boarded a bus headed north. Orlando disappeared behind me in the rear window, its palm trees shrinking until they looked like painted lines against the horizon. Ahead lay New York City, a place so vast and loud that I believed I could bury my old life inside it. The first weeks were brutal. I rented a single room above a laundromat in Queens. The air smelled of soap and steam, and the noise from the machines rattled the floor at night. I worked as a cleaner in office buildings, scrubbing floors long after the executives had gone home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Every dollar I earned came from my own hands, free from the lies that had once tied me down. In time, I found small freedoms I had never known before. I could decide what to eat without cooking for someone else's schedule. I could walk through Central Park on a Sunday without waiting for permission or pretending not to see the truth. I even enrolled in evening classes at a community college. Sitting in a classroom at 50, notebook open, I felt both foolish and proud. My world was expanding instead of shrinking. Then the letters began to arrive. At first, one from Sophia, her handwriting clumsy but heartfelt. Dear godmother, I miss you. Mommy says you moved far away. Uncle Robert is sad. Please don't forget us. Love, Sophia, I cried, holding that page. My tears stained the ink, blurring the words. But I could still feel the love pressing through every line. A week later, Michael sent a drawing of a house with stick figures holding hands. He had labeled them: Mommy, Daddy, Sophia, me, Daniel, and you. Even though my world had been torn apart, in their eyes I still belonged. Those letters became my lifeline. Each envelope was proof that love doesn't vanish just because trust has been broken. I would read them at night after long shifts, whispering prayers over each child's name. Betrayal had destroyed my marriage and my friendship, but not the bond I had built with those little souls. Slowly, I began to rebuild. Not only my circumstances, but my sense of self. I learned how to take the subway without fear, how to stretch $20 across a week of groceries, how to laugh with strangers who became friends. For the first time in decades, my choices were mine alone. Yet forgiveness lingered like a question I couldn't answer. Could I forgive Robert for stealing years of my life? Could I forgive Jennifer for twisting my trust into her shelter? And most of all, could I forgive myself for ignoring the signs? Some nights the anger returned sharp and hot. Other nights the loneliness whispered louder than the city sirens. But when I unfolded the children's letters, when I saw their love untouched by the sins of the adults around them, a softer voice rose inside me. Maybe forgiveness was less about them, and more about me. I didn't have an answer yet. But I knew this much. I had survived the fire. I was standing in the ashes, yes, but I was also learning to plant seeds there. And in time, perhaps, something new would grow. Loop. Could I forgive, even from afar? Years passed, and the woman they once whispered about as broken became someone new. In New York, I rose from cleaning hotel rooms to managing them. Later, I stood at the head of meetings where people respected my voice, not because I was someone's wife or someone's helper, but because I had earned that place myself. Financial stability followed. A modest apartment of my own, savings in the bank, and the quiet confidence of knowing I could pay my bills without depending on anyone. Those simple victories meant more to me than gold. They were proof that my worth had never belonged to Robert, Jennifer, or the lies they lived in. The children grew too. Our bond carried on through letters, visits, and small acts of love that distance could not erase. Sophia, always wise beyond her years, once wrote, Godmother, I told my class you are the bravest woman I know. You walked away when it hurt the most, and you built a life that made you proud. Those words sank deep. For so long I thought my story was only about betrayal and survival. But in their eyes, I had become something greater, a living lesson that courage is stronger than deceit. Michael found his way in studies. Daniel sketched the world with his gifted hands. David grew with stories of me he had never forgotten, and through them, I saw my truest revenge unfold. Not revenge in the cruel sense, but revenge as reclamation. Every success, every smile free of lies, every boundary I defended, these were my answers to the pain they once thought would silence me. I learned that revenge didn't need to destroy others. It needed to rebuild me. Sweet revenge was not about their downfall, but my rise. It was about showing that the woman they had underestimated could take back her dignity, her future, and her peace. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who chose herself over comfort, over fear, over the easy lie of staying. I see someone who refused to be defined by betrayal, and instead chose to write a new story with her own hand. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all. Not the suffering I endured, but the life I built because of it. A life of strength, independence, and love, on my terms. So if you hear my story and feel your own pain echo in it, I want you to remember this. You are not trapped by what others did to you. You are not defined by the years they stole. Your revenge, your justice, can be as simple as living well, as bold as choosing yourself, as powerful as refusing to be silent. Because in the end, justice is not always delivered in courts or punishments. Sometimes justice is simply reclaiming the life you were always meant to live. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to choose yourself over family? I'd love to hear your story. And if you want more true stories of resilience and emotional twists, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.